You hear this phrase repeated all the time when they talk about politicians, that they're all as bad as each other. And if you start believing that all politicians are as bad as each other, then you can no longer make democratic political choices because there seems no point. And this is when you start getting figures like Trump or Erdogan elected, Bolsonaro. They're products of the political cynicism and apathy of the voters and of their lack of faith in the political process generally.
Hi, we are honored to have today with us the awarded British novelist and writer, Mr. Jonathan Coe, who is invited by the Polish publications and the Eteron Institute for Research and Social Science. Mr. Coe, thank you very much for joining.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be here.
Let's start from your latest novel. In Bórnvil, you include personal details, such as the loss of your mother during the pandemic. Mary's death was actually the echo of your mother's death. At the same time, you decry the arbitrariness of power with the Partygate. Do you believe that arbitrariness of power, it is an inherent trait of the power, the arbitrariness, or it is a political choice? Does the exercise of power inevitably lead to arbitrariness?
I think these days it's important to remember that there are degrees of corruption and degrees of political irresponsibility and what you call arbitrariness. And it sounds almost a naive, idealistic point of view, but I think it remains true that some governments are better than others. Some politicians are more principled than others. And one of the big problems that we face in the UK at the moment, I don't know if it's the same in Greece, is a kind of a very sour, cynical mood of political apathy among voters. And a sense that you hear this phrase repeated all the time when they talk about politicians, that they're all as bad as each other. And if you start believing that all politicians are as bad as each other, then you can no longer make democratic political choices because there seems no point. And this is when you start getting figures like Trump or Erdogan elected, Bolsonaro. They're products of the political cynicism and apathy of the voters and of their lack of faith in the political process generally. So we have to restore that faith somehow. And we've had our own experience of this in the UK recently. A lot of people voted for Boris Johnson because he seemed different. He seemed funny, he seemed charming, and he seemed somehow outside the normal political process. But the one thing the British people find it very hard to forgive is hypocrisy. And when they began to understand that while they were following the COVID rules, in very painful circumstances in some cases, not being able to be with their families and loved ones when they were ill or dying, when the people were doing that, and the people in government and even the Prime Minister himself who were making these rules were not obeying them, were socialising, were having parties and so on, that was too bitter a pill to swallow, and we kind of reached the limits of our tolerance there.
I'd like to ask you now, in your view, do you believe that Thatcher's policies still define Britain today? And how do you believe that her policies have affected the country in the long term?
It's such a long time now. It's 44 years since Margaret Thatcher was elected, and she transformed Britain and British society, mainly not for the best, in my opinion. And no politician since then, really, no Prime Minister since then, has really turned the tide against Thatcherism. Even Tony Blair, who nominally was a Labour Prime Minister, his economic policies and his worldview were essentially Thatcherite. And to me, the most visible and profound consequence of Thatcherism has been creating inequality, social and economic inequality, and making that entrenched in British society. So we are, if you look at the statistics comparing us to other European countries, Britain is a very unequal society. We have money, we have wealth, but it's not evenly distributed. And Mrs. Thatcher was, it's hard to say, she was either very naive or very cynical about this, because she always used to maintain that if the wealth creators, the entrepreneurs, were allowed freedom to do what they wanted, then they would create wealth, and that wealth would trickle down to the rest of the population. But it never works like that. The wealth doesn't trickle down. And yet still that is the economic model that Britain follows. And unless we have some kind of reckoning with Thatcherism, then that inequality is not going to go away.
In your book, The Rodgers Club, you have aptly depicted the absence of class consciousness, exemplified by the distribution of hateful leaflets against immigrant labourers by a factory worker. There is a character named Bill Anderton, a trade unionist, who effectively articulates the notion that the working class has no ground for division, and that nationalism is that serves as the sole adversary. A crucial question is why the disadvantaged fail to extend their empathy towards others in similar circumstances, and instead of that, they choose to antagonize them. Ultimately, who do you believe that stands to gain from the fragmentation and the polarization within the working class?
Well, the people who stand to gain from division within the working class is the managerial class and the capitalists, of course. Racism is not confined to any one class. Racism, as far as I can see, crosses class boundaries and is outside class boundaries. There may be a difference in the way that people express their racism depending on their class background. It's kind of naive and idealistic to assume that there are certain sections or classes of society where you don't find it. At the moment, the alarming thing in Britain is that this very cynical way that the current government is exploiting racism as a way of creating division and increasing division among people, and in shoring up and supporting their own power, because we have a government which is pursuing very racist policies towards refugees and immigrants at the moment. But there has been a sense in Britain ever since the Brexit vote of 2016 that there is political advantage to be gained from playing on and even encouraging people's xenophobia, and of course that's the very opposite of what responsible governments and politicians should be doing.
And now, why do you think that your books have so great success in Greece, and why do you think they resonate so strongly with Greek readers? Do you draw any parallel between the political situations in Greece and in UK? Of course, despite the given differences in the political systems.
There are political similarities and analogies, I suppose, but I don't think that explains the popularity of my books here. I mean, I can't explain it really. It's very mysterious how a book will succeed in one country and fail in another. It's to do with the arbitrariness of the literary market, which is like any other marketplace. Some things fly and succeed, and some things sink. And my books are very popular in Greece and in France, and they're much less popular in Germany or in the Scandinavian countries. And I can't explain it in terms of national tastes in reading or anything like that. I think it's just the luck of the market.
And one final question. As Bridget, one of the characters in your latest book, in Bórnvil, suggests that everyone, at some point, must choose a side. I'm really curious to know your perspective on that. Which are the sides that you observe in the world today, and what are the key issues and the debates that are shaping the way that people take sides?
For me, what my novel tries to show in its overview of 75 years of British history is the extent to which the British people have or haven't become more tolerant of difference between people and more open in their relationships with people who are different from them, either in their sexuality or in their ethnicity or whatever it is. And to me, what gives me grounds for cautious optimism is that by and large the progress made in this area in the last 75 years has been significant, but we're in a reactionary moment right now. And the Brexit vote of 2016 exaggerated this and brought it out into the open. This creates difficulty and creates arguments and creates conflict and division, but again, in my more optimistic moments, I hope that this might be a good thing, because at least we're starting to have conversations around these difficult subjects now. And in that final scene in the novel, which you mention, the family that I'm writing about stands as a kind of metaphor for the country as a whole. And what Bridget is saying is that, for many years we've buried our differences, we've ignored our differences, we've tried to hide our differences, but there comes a point where that won't work anymore, and you have to confront them and talk about them. It's always a painful and a difficult process, but it needn't be, it shouldn't in this day and age lead to violence, lead to war, lead to people being cancelled or anything like this. We have to find ways of having conversations with each other. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Coe, it was really an honor. Thank you very much for your presence here. I enjoyed every second of this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.